Segregation, one of America's most troubling problems. White and black people were not treated equally. Black people were not entitled to the same things that white people were. For instance, schools were segregated. There were white schools and there were black schools. Black children were only allowed to attend schools designated for them. Bathrooms were also segregated. There were white restrooms and non-white restrooms. If a black person did not use the designated restroom, they would be arrested. Just like Rosa Parks. She was arrested when she sat at the front of the bus. She refused to move to the rear of the bus, which was the area designated for black people. They even segregated water fountains. There was a white water fountain and a colored water fountain. Colored is what they used to call black people back then. Segregation affected many sports, like baseball, football, and even basketball. For many years after his death, people have admired Jackie Robinson. Robinson was a male black baseball player in the 1940s and 50s. He was the first ever black man to play on a major league baseball team. He was accepted to the Brooklyn Dodgers by the Brooklyn Dodgers general manager, Branch Rickey. Others on the team refused to play with Robinson and tried convincing the manager to cut him. Rickey could not do that because Robinson was just too good. Other players on the team were jealous of Robinson and said that he stole their spotlight. He was teased by other coaches and other players, too. Robinson received death threats and hate mail because he was on the Dodgers. But because Robinson had a thick skin, he was able to have a successful career. Robinson was born January 31st, 1919, and died when he was 53 of a heart attack on October 24th, 1972. Football was yet another sport subject to segregation. Southern colleges were often segregated. Some northern schools, such as Amherst College, were almost exclusively white. However, Amherst stood out because they had two African American football players on their roster. Specifically, in the early 1890s, William Henry Lewis and William Tecumseh Sherman Jackson were part of the Amherst football team. At that time, integrated schools were required to bench their black players when they played segregated schools. There were examples going back to 1892 where schools would have to refuse to play their opponent due to the appearance of an African American on their roster. By the 1950s and 60s, most of the games between integrated and segregated schools would take place at the integrated institution. By that time, most segregated schools had grudgingly accepted the fact that they would have to face black players on the road. In instances where the integrated school would travel to the segregated school, games would often be canceled because the integrated schools refused to bench the black players. Southern teams found fewer and fewer schools willing to schedule games with them if they were going to require their opponent to bench their black players. Ultimately, Western and Northern schools began refusing to play Southern schools at all. This ultimately helped initiate the process of recruiting black players themselves. On May 5, 1967, Alabama, a previously segregated school, began spring practice.
And everything seems to be just like any previous year, but it's not. Head coach Bear Bryant spurs on his Southeastern Conference champs, and among the players, pass receiver Andrew Purnell, one of three Negroes on the squad. Birmingham's Tucker, temporarily sidelined with injuries, is another member of the previously segregated team. Big Doc Roan, a guard, likely to see first string action, completes the trio. Alabama gets ready.
Unlike baseball, there was no Jackie Robinson figure in collegiate football. Collegiate football was an arduous 80-year process led by lesser-known players. College basketball was very similar to college football. However, there was one game that changed segregation in college basketball forever. It was even called the Game of Change. During the March Madness of 1963, the NCAA matchup between Loyola University of Chicago, an integrated school, and Mississippi State, a segregated school, helped put an end to segregated basketball. At that time, college basketball was predominantly white, but in 1963, Loyola's starting lineup featured 4 black players. Prior to the game, hate mail started pouring in, warning Loyola not to play against any more white teams. In addition, it was an unwritten law in Mississippi that no college basketball team would ever play against blacks. The Mississippi governor at the time even tried to stop the team from leaving the state so they wouldn't play against any black players. However, the MSU team manager, the school's president, and the basketball team snuck out of town to East Lansing, Michigan to play Loyola. When the captains from the opposing teams went onto the court and shook hands, flashbulbs went off unbelievably, said the captain of Loyola. Segregation went on like this for many years, until Martin Luther King Jr., a civil rights activist, gave a speech titled, "I Have a Dream." It was the beginning of bringing segregation to an end. This famous speech took place on August 28, 1963, at the Lincoln Memorial. 250,000 of Americans attended to show support for his ideas. In his famous speech, he says, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." Black men and women were not treated equal or fairly during this time. They were not given the right to be free, the right to vote, the right to go to school with white children, the right to speak freely, the right to sit in the front of buses, the right to go to national parks or eat in certain restaurants. These rights were taken away just because of the color of their skin. This was not right. However, America found a way to stop this terrible inequality and start equalizing black and white people. Today, black people now have just as much rights as the white people and are able to participate in decisions that will and can make this country a better place.